Okay, so
Thank
Michael, we're
you.
ready to get started. And I'd like
Okay.
to start by thanking you so much for your help and for the very, very quick help. I sent you the request yesterday, and less than a couple of hours, you said I'm in. So thank you so much for that. And I really appreciate that. For those of you who are just joining, I'd like to remind you that this is an initiative we're doing to train you so you can support those who are going through traumas or going through issues. And this is our main intention. The recording of this session will be made available so everyone can benefit from this because this is our intention. It will be made available to our community, to members from other parts of the world, international community. So I see Bruno is attending. Thank you for joining, Bruno, from Mauritius. And I know that Sean from Australia also joined. We do have people from Lebanon, from Tunisia, from Morocco, from United Arab Emirates, and of course, we have some people from Egypt. So thank you so much, Michael, for that. And as soon as you're ready, please get started.
Okay. Does everybody have a copy of the handout that I sent to Mohammed?
I sent it to them and I'll paste the link in the chat so they can get it too.
Okay, I sent you an updated one just a few minutes ago. So,
Okay, I'll send that to them now.
okay. So what we're going to do today, and in this process, is address human suffering. So the subject is suffering, and it's helping a person who's dealt with loss. And we're talking significant loss of loved ones, loss of home, loss of country, loss of neighborhood, maybe some physical losses, physical hurts and pains. So the worst pain for human beings, however, is not physical, it's psychological. It's when we lose meaning. It's when we lose our sense of significance. It's when our memories keep tormenting us with intrusive thoughts. It's when we start questioning ourselves, our value, our purpose, our meaning. And so helping a person recover when that kind of loss has gone on, that's going to be our design, our purpose today. For those of you who will be sitting down and engaging people who's coming out of Gaza, um, the first and most important thing is your ability to sit with them with care, with compassion, with respect, and presence. So, what we know in the field of psychology and psychotherapy is that your presence is the most healing factor of all. So, while we got lots of great techniques and lots of wonderful things to do, even more important, creating that context of just listening and being present and caring. And that's going to help them to recover their personal power so they can be more resilient, so they can be resourceful, so that they can rebuild their lives. Now, as you said and listened to them, your big challenge will be to not get associated into their pain. So staying out of their pain, being sensitive to it, being empathetic with it, but staying out of their pain. Because if you get into their pain and you personalize, you're not going to be in the right state. You're not going to be able to be helpful. So you need to be in your best state. And so as you remind yourself why you're sitting with someone who is suffering, you're sitting with them because you want to show them your love, your care, your compassion. Keep reminding yourself that you're there to be respectful of their potentials to rise up and take care of themselves. So it's not that you're taking care of them in a dependency way, but that you're helping them to recover their power, their hope, their meanings, their significance. And so getting your own ego out of the way is going to be just so critical. There may be people you can't help. It happens to all of us when we sit with someone suffering. And you may not be able to help them in the given session because they may be in too much pain. And so get your ego out of the way and focus on just a loving presence and a willingness to help as they're ready. So if you have the handout, and I'm just going to go through the handout a little bit right now until we get to uh, the patterns, and then I'm going to open it up, ask you what you want to hear. Um, this is a focused training designed to enable you to do what we're going to call meta counseling. So unlike coaching, it's really not about challenging someone. So being you got to take off your coaching hat. This is not about challenging. They've got enough challenge when someone is coming out of a war zone and is trying to put their lives back together again. So what we want to do is to provide them the counsel, the way to cope with life right now, today, as they're facing it, so that they can do the best that they can. So on the handout, on the first page is the interview. So unlike coaching, don't jump in and ask, what do you want to achieve? We'll get to that as the last question. So before you ever do that, just be there, be present to them. And a lot of times when a person is in human suffering, they just need to download. They need to tell their story. They need to be heard. And this may be frustrating for you as a coach. That's why taking off the coaching hat is going to be so important. Just be there, listen to their story. Now, we don't do that in coaching. And that's the difference now with this kind of counsel. Ask them, and what else? And what else? And what else? The first question or statement there is, tell me what you've seen and experienced. And then just listen empathically and don't do anything, just validate them as a person. A couple examples in the handout. You've been through a living hell because you want to validate them. You want to confirm their experience as they tell about it. You might say something like, I'm sorry that you had to go through that experience. So that's your heart going out to them and touching them. And if they have been in a lot of suffering and have lost a lot, it may just turn on the tear ducts and they need to have a good cry about it. So as you say that question, or that statement, tell me what you've seen and experienced. You might just make a list of their losses, their stresses, their questions. The stress is going to be a big problem. Stress is when we take our energy, our power, trying to cope with something. And these people coming out of Gaza, they've been, what, 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks in a war zone. And who knows what they've seen and experienced. And so just their stress levels, I'm going to guess, are just sky high. And even though they're out of that now, if you're sitting with them, the experience, they're probably not out of the experience. So the experience is still there. And just so make a list of their losses. Because as you identify their losses, what have you lost? Part of the psychology of grief that we'll get to later is what do they need to do to recover from their losses? Some losses obviously are permanent. It's gone. But the whole thing about us as human beings is when things are lost from our uh, ego investment, and that investment's gone, we need to recover it. And helping them have a sense that they can. Life can go on and they can recover. So their losses, their stresses, their questions. The second one there is, What are you now struggling with? What's the experience inside your mind and heart? What are you thinking and feeling? So this directs them to go inside, and that's where we want them to go. They'll have a tendency to stay on the outside. This is what's happened, and this is what I'm suffering from, angry about, frustrated with. But invite them to go in. What are you thinking and feeling? What's the experience on the inside? And now set and make a list of, in your mind or on paper, the beliefs that you're hearing, the understandings that they say, the conclusions that they're drawing. One of the real danger of any kind of human suffering and loss is sometimes we draw some really bad conclusions that hurt us, hurt our family. We close up, we stop being the living, thriving person that we were. So listen for that. Listen for physical symptoms. So they may say, I'm not sleeping. I have thought intrusion. Pictures and movies that are something I've seen just keep coming back. I can't get rid of them. So listen for physical symptoms and the problems that they have. When you do, then just as a simple acknowledgement, you might say something like, so you can't sleep very well. And just helping them to confirm, here's the symptom that's coming out of this pain. Another thing there in the handout is, so you're questioning why God is allowing this. So people have really existential questions that they're struggling with. And sometimes that is some of the meanings they're going to have to address a little bit later on. What I wrote in the notes is stay in diagnosis mode. Don't try to fix anything. If you jump in and try to fix something, well, think of it this way. Well, let's reframe it that way. Well, let's get you out of that state. If you do that too soon, then it feels like you're discounting the suffering and the pain. And we don't want to do that. We want to validate you. You're suffering. I recognize that. I'm here for you. The third one is what has been traumatic for you. So we want to find out what they are experiencing as a trauma. Now, trauma, hurt, wound, something tearing something else up. Trauma can be both outside and physical, and it can be inside. When it's outside and physical, it's a problem to solve. When it's inside, when we're traumatizing ourselves, and that's always the case. Trauma is outside, but traumatizing is what we do to ourselves as we essentially torment ourselves with some wound. And what's getting wounded is the mind. That's what's getting wounded. Shows up in the emotions. The emotions hurt, but the hurting emotions, the fear, the anger, the regret, the distress, the stress, that's just the emotional pain that's coming from the mental understanding, beliefs, movies that they're playing in their mind. So, what has been traumatic to you? And now listen for the cognitive distortions, because that's how the traumatization occurs. So we're sorting out a difference between trauma and traumatization. And traumatization is when I'm personalizing, emotionalizing, catastrophizing, blaming, doing all of those cognitive distortions that just it takes the misery inside. And so we want to listen to that. At this point, once again, don't call their hand on it. It's the way they're thinking, and as they express it, many times as they express it, and you just ask questions and are curious and compassionate about it. So So you feel right now you'll never again love. And just let the person hear what they're saying, because then they may start adjusting it a little bit. But as you pick out and flush out the cognitive distortions, you're helping to identify the meanings in their mind that's really creating the distress. The next one, what do you feel responsible for, and to whom do you feel responsible? A lot of people coming out of a war zone or suffering or a calamity of some sort, a lot of times they have survivor guilt. I survived, others have not. And they feel guilty, not guilty of anything. They haven't done anything wrong, but they feel guilty or ashamed. And and so this question is going to help to flush that out, because the guilt is false. The shame is false shame. They don't need to be ashamed of surviving. But a lot of times that's one of the distortions that occurs. They feel bad that they got out and others did not. So asking them about that responsibility to for, that would give us maybe some clarity of how to be helpful later on if we hear that kind of survivor guilt. The next one is, um, and this is now the fifth one, and it's after a little bit of time. How was your mental and emotional well-being and health before the war? And what we're doing here is trying to determine, was the person basically okay when everything started, or was the person already fragile, not so good state when it all started? If they were basically okay when it all started, helping them to recover will be much easier than if somebody was already fragile, already having some mental, emotional distresses, and the whole war zone experience just amplified everything and took it to a breaking point. So asking this question also helps them to start thinking in terms of mental and emotional well-being, and that psychological health is going to be the core that they need in order to cope with life as it is and cope with it well. The next one, number 6, there is, given all that you've been through, what do you need? What do you think you need most right now that's going to help you face life and cope well? And so hopefully by the time you've asked question 6, they have expressed a lot and they feel like they have downloaded a lot of their stress. Now, if you ask that question and they can't answer, or they don't answer your question, so this is one place to really notice: are they answering the question? If they're not answering the question, they probably need more time to download. So just let them download their griefs, their pains, their disappointments. Um, if they're not ready, answer that question. What do you think you need most now? Then they probably just need, let me express it a little bit more and get have that brief articulated. If they do, then it's going to help you to know where to go from here, um, helping them identify what's next. Finally, the 7th question that's on this handout is the first question of coaching. What would you like to achieve in our session or sessions together? What would you like to achieve? And expect on this one that they don't know. They just want to feel better. They just want to get out of the grief or the depression or the anger. So they may not know. And that's now where you can say, here's some ideas for you. And you can give them a menu list of let's reduce your stress. What about that? Let's get you to stop playing that movie in your mind that's tormenting you, that's creating all this suffering. Let's get you into a really good state where you can find your powers, your personal powers for coping and being resourceful. Let's uh, let's let's do the grief pattern so that you can have a good cry and get it out and then move on. So this is the interview, and this is what I would recommend if you sat with someone who's coming out of that situation. Spend some time, maybe a whole session, just on the interview, um, and keep in mind if they're not ready to do something, to start changing something, if they're not ready and they just need to express it, then let them express it. Be there with compassion and love until they're ready. And then the last two questions is in that preparation to help them get ready. What would you like to achieve? Do you know what you need to do? Those questions presuppose there is something to do. It's just a matter of, do you know it? It's just a matter of, are you ready? And if they don't have the answer to that, you can provide that counsel, that guidance, that recommendation. And you can say, here's a recommendation I'm going to make to you. Let's work on reducing your stress. Let's work on getting those thoughts that's intruding to stop intruding. Let's take the emotional charge out of the experiences you've had. So that's the first thing, the interview. And after that, then it's a question of what do we want to do and where do we want to start? So I'm going to stop right here because I do want this to be as practical as possible in terms uh, of what you can do. So questions or comments here?
If you have questions, you can write them in the chat box or raise your hand so we can unmute you.
Okay. All right, I see one hand already.
Good
So go
evening.
ahead. Evening.
محمد انا هتكلم بالعربي بليز وانت تترجم له.
Okay, so she will say her question in Arabic and I'll translate it. Okay, go ahead. قول اتفضلي.
الاسئله والنقاط اللي اتكلم فيها مايكل رائعه جدا جدا لما اكون بعمل جلسه كوتشنج، لكن انا اوريدي بتعامل مع ناس عندهم تروما، عانوا من صدمه، شافوا اهلهم بيموتوا، بيوتهم وقعت فوقيهم، طلع اطفاله ميتين، طلعت اطفالها ميتين قدامها. كل الاسئله انا دلوقتي عايزه تولز ان انا اقدر اساعدها فعليا لما بيبقى عندها تصورات ذهنيه. مفيش هنا ديستورشن، مفيش
تاني
هنا.
بس عشان انا هيجي لي تروما ان انا اترجم كل مره واحده. Let me say it part by part. So what she's saying so far is that the questions are very good if we're doing a coaching session, but they might not be appropriate if I'm starting to deal with someone who's going through trauma. And I think she's looking for techniques or things to do other than questions.
Well, see, these 7 questions that begin, this is what you do when you're not teaching. And if you look at the handout, what I've emphasized over and over again, just be present and just keep validating the person suffering and go through these questions. These questions help them to download. So tell me what you've experienced is the first one. It just helps them download. The second one, what are you struggling with? The third one, what's been traumatic to you? You're guiding their downloading. Otherwise, they can go into spins, go round and round saying the same thing over and over and getting into a spin. And so this helps to direct their thinking and feeling as they download. So as you do this, take off your coaching hat.
So we have another question from Hadil. She's asking, what if the person is totally in a panic state and they cannot speak? What can we do with them?
Okay. So if I'm sitting with someone and they are hyperventilating and in a panic state, because that's generally what happens when someone's in panic, then I'm going to start to breathe with them. Because my breathing, and this is what we do with casing, when we try to breathe with a person. So breathe, but breathe in a different way than they're breathing. And then as they are taking many, many small, quick breaths, tell them, and now take one big breath. Hold it, release it. Take another deep breath. Hold it, that's right, release it. By doing that, you're helping to change their blood chemistry and the oxidation to their brain. Because when they're in panic, they are hyperventilating generally, and they are not getting good oxygen to their brain, why they can't think very clear, and why they can't talk. And so, once again, this is the difference between coaching and counseling. You are guiding them and directing them as to what to do. So pace, and then immediately start giving words to their pain. So if they're in panic, as they start thinking about it in your presence, first of all, direct their breathing, and then say, and you can let out your distress. You can let out your pain in words, and your words are, and you just start guiding them to release it. Do not. This is where it's you'll do more harm to them if you sympathize with them. So empathize, stay unassociated yourself, and then guide them to change their state. Now, you might want to get them to stand up and walk around. Standing and walking will change their breathing too, and it'll change that fear state into where they can start to manage that state. Throughout the process, you can say the words that we say when we coach anybody about emotion. That's right, it's just an emotion. Thank God you can feel fear. Thank God you can feel anger. It's just an emotion. And breathe it in, breathe it out. So if someone cannot speak, that's what I would do with.
Michael, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I need to summarize what I understood from what you have said. What I understand, I'm there with my presence, with my empathy, compassion, and silence. Lots of silence. What I
Yeah.
understood from your words, that your questions, I don't have to ask them all of them, but if they are appropriate, if their emotions are stabilized, they feel heard, they feel compassion, then, and their mental state is ready, then I could be able to ask them those mental questions or powerful questions that would intrude their thoughts and get them to a better state.
Right.
Until now, I am do understand what you're saying, right? We are on the same side. Okay. Now, I was wondering, sometimes when I ask clients who are really their well-being is quite okay, but they're emotional, they're not traumatized, as Gaza's may be peace upon them with them. They get irritated when I ask them, what do you want to achieve? If they're in an emotional state.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if I would ask them, instead of achieving something in the action state, I would rather ask them, what support do you want from me right now? What do you think?
No, that's good. That's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
With some people suffering, and I used to experience this when I worked with people with depression and anxiety, sometimes people have lived in that state so long that you're right. When you say, what do you want to achieve? They go, achieve. What else is there? I mean, they really cannot think out of the box. They're caught really in that emotional distress. And so I found that if I say, do you like this? I mean, it's such a rhetorical question. They go, no. Do you want to stay here? No. Maybe you should. So this is where you challenge them a little bit, and they go, no. So if you didn't have this stress, would you have serenity of mind? Would you have peace of mind? Would you breathe clearer? Would you sleep better? And you start giving them that menu list, and it starts helping them. Oh, this is what I would like to achieve. Sense of peace of mind or something. So I see a question, what if the person continues to go in loop, shedding their emotions and afraid to connect? Well, that's exactly what I would do, because what we're talking about is someone stuck. And they're so stuck they can't think outside of the box because they're just inside that box so much. And so sometimes do you like this? Do you want this? Those kinds of questions, well, of course not. And then as you give them some menu list, that helps to help them to think outside the box. The next question I see there on the list is, how can I deal with victim mentality that's been inherited over the years? We're going to get to that. It's one of the things that we have to address, and that'll come with the second pattern that I've got listed on the handout, the resourceful good state. So I want to address that, the victim mentality, because that's one of the real dangers, and it's one of the things that it's like they get in that box of victim, and being a victim means I have, the inferential listening is that if I'm a victim, then I can do nothing. I have no power, no choice. It's fated. It's deterministic, and we want to break that kind of thinking, because that kind of thinking is some of the worst suffering that a human being can entertain. So we do want to get them out of that. And some of the patterns, you'll probably have to do several patterns to get them out of that mentality, especially like the question says, if they have inherited it over the years. And you can start to detect that when you ask that question, how was your mental and emotional well-being before all of this started?
Michael, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question about building the rapport, because I have worked as a volunteer with them before in 2008. The situation sometimes is like, yeah, I worked with the people who became blind, people who lost their 4 limbs. Coming close would take me like a week of visiting them, especially the blind one doesn't want to be touched. So any tips about severe traumatized physically and emotionally? So they are in physical pain and in a very negative emotional situation. How to build the rapport?
So in those instances, you're probably not able to build what we call physical rapport. Physical rapport is when you're sitting like the other person, you're moving like the other person, the volume is the same as the other and all that stuff. So now you have to shift higher, and the next level higher is verbal rapport. So if I'm sitting with someone and let's say they're blind and they don't want to be touched, I'm going to put in words that fit and that correspond to their experience. And so here we are in your home. You're blind. You cannot see me. I can see you, but you cannot see me. And one of the ways I can respect you is to not touch you because that's what you said you want. So when you say words that fit and describe the person's state, and their response to that is, yes, that's right, then you've created rapport. And that's verbal rapport, linguistic rapport. So this is where once you learn acknowledgments and how to put into words, to use their words and to say their words back to them, we cannot not respond to our own words. So if I say, I'm really angry about this, and my counselor, my coach says, you're really angry about that. That's right. You're getting me. So move to linguistic rapport and begin describing their experience in words that are more accurate and precise than they can say. And then that'll be very compelling to create a connection, a bridge between you and them. I see another question, but someone's going to have to translate it for me.
So her question in Arabic, what do you mean by the victimhood mentality? When you spoke about the victim mentality, what do you mean by that?
Well, so a victim is someone who has been mistreated. A victim is someone who is suffering at the hands of someone else. We are a victim of the car crash. We're a victim of the house burning down. We're a victim. So something has happened. We did not create it. We did not do it to ourselves. And so now we're a victim. The victim mentality is to think, I am a victim. I can do nothing. I have no power, no choice. And that kind of mentality, a person just giving up. And obviously, they're not going to be able to cope with life with that kind of attitude. And so helping them to discover their personal powers. That's what we do in APG when you learn the very first pattern, the power pattern, helping a person discover that they can always think, they can always feel, they can always speak, and they can always act. And these fundamental powers means that they're not a victim, but that they can be a victor over themselves and over their experience. They may not, none of us have total power to control the outside, but we have incredible powers if they can be developed to develop our internal world.
Hi, Michael. I have a question. I just came in. I'm not sure if this is something you've talked about before I came. But my question is, how do you deal with anger? I'm assuming there'll be lots of anger, rage towards the world. They feel that they haven't been supported the way they were expecting or they wanted to. So would that put them in a state where they're actually accepting any kind of help or support from us?
Okay.
considering the whole borders things, and they do have a bit of anger when I watch some of the videos online.
Yeah.
They are a bit angry towards us. So how do we handle that?
Well, like any emotion, it's just an emotion. So embrace it, bring it in, pace it. So you're angry. How angry are you? What else are you angry about? Let them download that anger. I would guess that they would be angry for many, many, many things. Um, um, and people will tend to fall into one or two categories. With all the losses and all the distresses, some will just be afraid, and others will be as mad as hell about it. And so one group will be quite aggressive. Once again, you as the counselor, you've got to be unassociated so that when they express their anger and when they raise their voice and they're screaming and maybe using some language that you don't like, just let it be. Don't take it personal and just say, and what else? And what, because what you're attempting to do is, first of all, download the emotional stress. The ones who are fearful, they are turning the anger inward toward themselves, which is why they do a lot of, I'm a victim, I don't deserve anything. And so that they're punishing themselves. But whether it goes anger or fear, just embrace it and just set it in your mind. It's just an emotion and it's okay. And they have legitimate reasons to be mad, angry. And let them tell their story, articulate that. At first, that's the most important thing to do. And what I said from the very beginning, take off that coaching hat until they're ready to make a change. Because if you go in there, you're too angry. Let's reduce this anger. It doesn't respect the experience that they've gone through and that they're in right at that moment.
Okay, thank you.
So if there's no other questions at this point, let me identify the 7 patterns that's in your handout. I'm going to just overview them, and then we can go back and deal with them in more detail. And you'll notice I've written things like on that first one, self-esteem. Let's get you right with yourself. Let's get you right with yourself. I want to do a pattern with you so that you can distinguish yourself as a human being, as a person, and what you do and experience. And that what you experience is different from who you are. What you experience does not have to define you, that these are different. And let's get you right with you so that you don't take what happens out there and bring it in, and it creates the pain and the suffering. So you'll notice that in the handout I wrote, this will break the personalizing frame. Now there's 3 frames that take trauma out there and bring it in. One is personalizing, it's about me. The other is it's pervasive, it's everywhere. And the other one is permanent, it's forever. So we want to break those 3 frames. So through the process of these patterns, if you do the pattern, if you do this in 1 session with someone, or if you do it in 7 sessions, 3 sessions, these patterns will break up that traumatizing. So traumatizing occurs when you take an external event, bring it inside, and say, it's me, it's everywhere, it's forever. So we want to break that up. And the first thing that'll break it up is I'm a human being. I'm not that. And I'm not going to let that determine who I am or what I'm about. So we're going to separate person and behavior, person and experience. So that would be the self-esteeming, so that then the person can value self even in the midst of that. The second one is let's get you right. Let's get you into a good state. So what I wrote there is, I know this may be hard, but if you stay in an unresourceful state, one of pain, stress, anger, fear, sadness, you will not be at your best to cope with life from this point onward. Let's get you out of that suffering state so that you don't live in it. Visiting it from time to time to do your grief work is one thing. Living in it, entirely different thing. So that might be something you would say to frame this getting into a resourceful state. And of course, so now we're going to access a good resourceful state. It could be a calm state, could be a neutral state, could be compassionate toward myself state, passionate toward others state, it could be a learning state or a curious state, anything that the person will feel more resourceful about. It could be the power zone state. Let's recover your powers, your capacities, your ability to make a difference in your own life. And so this good resourceful state is just something other than the pain state. So we don't want to discount the painful state or the suffering state. We want to say, if you want to visit it from time to time to do your grief work, that's quite appropriate, but don't live here. Live in a normal human state where you got things to do and people to love and life to rebuild. Now, use the cognitive distortion list is a bullet point under this one. There are ways of thinking that will guarantee to make you miserable and to perpetuate your suffering. So one of the ways to help a person discern, is this a good state or is this a suffering state, is to pull out the 14 items of these cognitive distortions and just do a checklist with them so that they start catching themselves with that wrong kind of thinking. So this would be the second thing. And what this is going to do is to, it starts to break the pervasive frame. So if trauma is, it's about me and it's everywhere, pervasive, then this helps to break it. No, it's not pervasive. The suffering state is one state, but I have other states. And so now by stepping out of that and recovering their power, so you could do the power zone or just any kind of accessing a good state and anchoring it. The third one is releasing the past. So the statement there is, let's get right about time. You have left a war zone. You're no longer there physically, but are you there mentally? Are you there emotionally? Let's get you out of there. Let's get you into the present, the now, so that you can access your inner powers and build a better future. So this is going to break the permanent frame. So we're breaking the pervasive, it's everywhere, the personal, it's me, and now the permanent, it's forever. So this is where I would and this is what I did a lot when I used to do counseling and therapy work. And it's one of the most powerful things of NLP. I would watch a person point to where their past is, behind them or to the side, and then I would say, so that's where your past is. As you're telling your story today, where's the past? And oftentimes it's right in front of them. They're in it. And so helping them, let's put the past where it belongs. And do you have now? Because right now you're not there anymore. So let's not live in the past. So this is where you would do some of the timeline accessing as a pattern and a process, and helping them to not live in the past. So that'd be the third thing, getting right about time. Those three break up the traumatization. Now, the fourth one there is the grief pattern. And once again, some people are afraid of their sadness, they're afraid of their grief, so they won't go there. And so it's up to you and me to embrace it, to welcome it in. It's just grief. Grief is normal and natural, and is actually a good experience when you've suffered loss, because it helps you to own the loss and come to terms with that loss. So elicit what the person has lost, listen empathically, just be with them. They may need a good cry. And so sometimes they have prevented themselves from doing that. Or they may have had no opportunity to do that because they've been living in that war zone. And so now's the time. And framing their tears, your tears are God's gift to you to help you to release the suffering. Tears of release, tears of cleansing away the pain. And so the grief pattern would be that. Once we've done that, now we're ready for the movie rewind pattern. So that's the next one. So the movie rewind pattern. The movie rewind is for anybody who just keeps playing the movies and the thoughts that intrude so that they can't get free from those weeks that they've been in that war zone, and the thoughts just keep intruding. The movie rewind helps them to now get some distance from it and take the emotional charge out. So that'll also break the pervasive frame and bring them into the present. The next pattern there is the acceptance pattern. And what I wrote there as a way for you to frame it with them, acceptance is the end of the grieving process and the beginning of the ego strengthening process. Acceptance means acknowledging what is. It does not mean approving, condoning, resigning. With acceptance, you develop the wisdom to distinguish what you can change and what you can't. And it frees you to focus on developing your resources for coping effectively. So acceptance, you've done the acceptance with the self-esteem pattern. And now we're going to bring that acceptance of just what can you not change that you need to just come to terms with and just accept it instead of rejecting it and fighting it. As long as there's fight about reality, a person is going to be in torment. So that'll be the sixth pattern there, acceptance. And the seventh one is forgiveness. And once again, framing it so that people can understand what forgiveness actually is, because there's a lot of myths about forgiveness. Forgiveness is true freedom from the past and from needing to keep the cycles of hurt and anger and revenge going. Forgiveness is for you. It's not for someone else. You can forgive without that other person ever knowing that you're forgiving. It frees you from them living in your head and controlling your emotions. It frees you so that you can be good for the people around you in your life, the people you love and care about. If you're unforgiving, then you keep your enemy in your mind and your heart, and you keep the anger and the revenge alive inside, and it'll do you no good. So we got 7 patterns, and you can, I've gone through this overview so that you can see the progression and what we're doing with these patterns with a person. And with some people who are quite ready, you can go through these pretty quickly. With other people, you may have to do the same pattern 2 or 3 sessions so that it really begins to change things inside, and they're getting more and more ready to learn how to cope with life after the event. So I'll stop here again. So I see a question I need to ask in case I have more than one person in the place have repeated trauma and they are working in the same place and they anchor workplace by trauma. Tell me a little bit more about that. They're triggering each other into the traumatized state. So if I see the answer, yes. So so here's the distinction. Most of what I'm talking about is a trauma that has occurred and they're out of it. So they've come out of Gaza. They've come out of the war zone. They're not there. So the trauma is not present. It's in the past, immediate past, but still in the past. It's a whole different thing when someone is living in a situation that is traumatic. Now, I don't know what the trauma would be in the workplace if someone is verbally abusing them or physically abusing them, then that's a whole different story. Now it's not so much psychological, it's physical. Get out of there. So this is what we do when anybody is in an immediate danger or threat. In the years that I did counseling, 3 times I called the police and said, my client is going to hurt himself or has threatened to hurt someone else. And where I live in the state of Colorado, if it's every counselor, every therapist is legally responsible to letting the authorities know if someone is in immediate danger. And so if there is an immediate danger, it's just got to be stopped. So I see the words, one of the team is dead. So I don't understand that. The forgiveness that we are talking about at the end of the pattern is forgiving themselves or forgiving the enemy in the war. Well, whatever you need to forgive. So forgiveness, when we come to that last pattern, asking the question, what do you need to forgive? Who do you need to forgive?
Michael, if most of those people, if not all of them, they'll be suffering from PTSD. So you get panic attacks, nightmares. They could recall the whole experience or a certain situation. So how do we help them with that? To at least be able to go through the day-to-day anxieties or panic.
That's what these 7 patterns are designed to do. So when you break down post-traumatic stress disorder, the person is replaying the movie. So we got a movie rewind. The intrusion of thoughts, the movie rewind can undo that. The releasing of the past, the grieving, all of these 7 patterns is designed to undo what we call post-traumatic stress disorder.
Because I'm thinking that probably we won't have that much time with them specifically that will be going back and forth. So maybe you'll have like a day or two over the weekend to go. And then you find something like this. So what would be the thing that we can do in one session or 2 sessions? I know it's hard, but
well, I would make sure that they have separated person and experience, person and behavior, person and experience. Make sure that they made that distinction so they stop personalizing. Once they stop personalizing, the movie rewind will take the emotional charge out. When I was doing therapy in the 1990s, most of the men who had post-traumatic stress disorder were previous soldiers in the Vietnam War, and they were still having nightmares, the stress, and so they were drugging, they were doing alcohol, they were doing everything just to try to get away from their thoughts. So I would run the movie rewind because they had in their movie, 20 years old now, back to the 1970s, pictures of being in battle and all kinds of things. So we would run the movie backwards and take it out. And then they would have another memory. So we would run the movie back. After about 3 or 4, I would do a little induction. And the induction went like this. Now that your brain knows how to run a movie backwards, your unconscious mind can begin to run all of the horror movies backward that afflict you or torture you. Your unconscious mind can begin to do that because now your mind knows how to take the charge out. And with that, most of the men that I worked with, 3 or 4 run the movie backwards. Their system got the message. They don't have to keep replaying this. I've got a resource for addressing this. And for most of them, the post-traumatic stress disorder was over. So, Mohammed, there's another one I'll need you to translate.
So the question is how to help someone move from the past to the future when they have been going through the same issues for many, many years.
Well, so when you do the timeline process, that's the third pattern here in this handout that we'll get to after a little bit. When you do this, make sure you got a commitment from the person that they're sick and tired of living in the past. And so just asking them that question, you've been living in the past, in your mind and your emotions, you've been living in the past. Are you sick and tired of that? Are you ready to move away from that? So you need to get a commitment before you run the patterns. And then once you have that commitment, and then just do the ecology questions. Does that serve you? Does that bring out your best? Does this enhance your life? Does this honor your spiritual life? And when you run the ecology questions and they go, no, it doesn't, are you ready to make a change? And then a lot of that change will be the cinematic features in their mind. Where do you put the past? How far away do you need to put the past? What beliefs do you need to establish so that you frame it in such a way that you are a person who lives in the present, not in the past? And so, but the whole key will be, are they committed to getting out of living in the past? And then it's just a matter of changing their semantic structures, the semantic gestures that they make, the semantic space that they live in, and then some of the beliefs and understandings that will help frame it in their metaplace. So remember, with these patterns, let me just drive this one home again. The difference between trauma and traumization. Trauma is the bad thing that happens. And a bad thing that's happened over and over and over and over for years, it is so easy to bring it in and make it personal. It's about me, it's my life, I've known nothing else but that. So we personalize it. That's what does the most damage, to personalize it. Once you can separate that out, that's an event, and this is a human being, and I'm not going to let that define me. Now, this will be true in any kind of coaching or counseling when a person has gone through something and now they define themselves that way. I'm a divorcee. No, you went through a divorce. I'm alcoholic. No, you went through alcoholic abuse, but you're more than that. I'm a victim of sexual abuse. No, that's not who you are. That's what you went through. And by keep separating these two, then the person has a space, their own personal space for being who they are as a human being, as a person, apart from the activities. And so this is the first one. Once it's happened over and over again, it's easy to bring it in and say it's everywhere. It affects everything. But that's a lie. It doesn't affect everything. We can create different spaces so that other aspects of life can thrive even when this kind of suffering is there. And it's not forever. It's just at that point, at that time, maybe repeated throughout time, but it's not forever. And that's what we want to break. That it's that, there, then. And then that keeps us free. And now we can, in a healthy way, realize I'm more than that. And there's many aspects of my life that are not affected by that. And I'm not going to let that control my future. If it's something, I'm going to put that in the past. So that'll be the key to knocking out the post-traumatic stress disorder and the ongoing torture that a person goes through from all the stress inside, not sleeping, nightmares, and just all the kind of things that a person goes through when they haven't dealt with that suffering. So if there's no more questions, I think I'll just start in and go through these 7. Does that sound like a good plan, Mohamed?
So we have a question from Tarek.
Okay.
How can I help them see a different future when their experience has been full of pain being unheard and living injustice and doesn't seem to have tangible evidence of changing soon. And knowing that this is horrific reality is still happening to family and friends back home.
Well, what I've just said is the answer. So I can say it again. And once with everybody, asking them, are you ready? Do you want to live there? Yes, that's been the experience so far up until now. Do you want to keep living there? Are you ready to step out of that and develop the coping skills to live life more fully, more compassionately, more lovingly, and to create a better and different hope? Because if you let these past events and current events determine your experience, then you're a victim. You've just victimized yourself. And helping a person to own their powers and to say, in spite of everything around me, I'm going to believe in something else. This is what Nelson Mandela did in the prison in South Africa. For 27 years, he was in the prison, but he would not let the prison control his state of mind, his state of emotion. I read his book, The Long Walk Home, and how he lived his life in those 27 years, not as a victim, but really as a victor. He made friends with the prisoners. He learned their language. He talked to them. He shared history and poems with them. And when he came out of prison, he was not traumatized. So in 1992, when he came out of prison, he met Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton said, I expected to see an old man. And he said he was vigorous. He was alive. He had passion. And Bill Clinton said, I couldn't understand how he could live in that dehumanizing, stressful, prejudicial, apartheid system and come out like that. Well, he came out like that because he kept meaning alive. He kept his heart loving and caring. And when he came out, 2 years later, he was elected president of South Africa. And when he was elected president, he created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which everybody says, all the historians say, that prevented South Africa from having a civil war because he preached forgiveness. So it's possible. And people like Nelson Mandela, and there's lots of people like him that are great examples of not giving in to the trauma. And that's what we got to teach people to do, to not give in. Especially when we can't change the external circumstances, we can always change the internal. And inviting people, let's change the internal, is what we do as counselors, as coaches.
I have a question regarding the obstacles that would face me as a human being when I'm dealing with a difficult situation like this. Someone is suffering, someone is in pain. I would think that I have to keep telling myself that what they are going through is the reality, and they are able and they have the strengths and the tools to go through it. All I have to do is just show them that there is a light in another way from the darkness they're living in.
Yeah.
And by doing this, I was wondering what obstacles would be rather than the sympathy. I wouldn't fall into sympathy or to sympathize with them, but I would rather choose to empathize and be compassionate with how they are doing and to fully trust the process and the journey they are into, going into it, and keep seeing them that they have lots of potential, lots of strengths, without pushing it, from
Right.
an empathy state. not to save them, or this is totally
Yeah.
so I don't have to move them from one state to another. I have to support them from where they are and just reflect what they are going through and make sure if this is what you really want to do, is this living in the past benefits you, something like this. So what other
Right.
obstacles would face me as a human being dealing with them?
Well, I think you've described really part of what you and I need to do when we're working with someone really suffering and helping them to recover from it. So that's the main thing. The only thing I would add to that is the biggest obstacle will be in their mind and the way they're thinking. So the biggest obstacle will be their cognitive distortions. They're personalizing, blaming, emotionalizing, catastrophizing, overgeneralizing. The, the, the thinking we do creates the meaning that we live, which creates the states and the emotions and our experience and therefore our skills and our abilities. So when we make the thinking right, everything else will get righted. And so the biggest obstacle will be old ways of thinking will keep coming back. And the more we can help them to become aware, the thinking is the problem for the inside. You've probably heard me say, if you've watched me do coaching sessions with people from time to time, uh, I say it fairly frequently. We find some thinking in a client, and I'll say, you know, if I thought that way, I would have the same experience you're having. So the problem is not you, the problem is this thinking. Let's see if we can change this thinking so that you don't have to have those problems.
As if I would reflect to the person in front of me, it seems like we are falling into the same kind of thinking that is causing us suffering. What do you think about that? And then I will
Yeah.
give them the responsibility to
Yeah.
choose to be more accountable and be responsible to get out of it. But
Yeah,
after
exactly.
hearing
Yeah.
them venting and acknowledging and validating what they're going through without pushing anything.
Yeah.
Without pushing anything. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And what you're doing when you do that, you're giving feedback. Here's how I'm experiencing you. You're giving them a little mirror, and hopefully they can see themselves in that feedback you're giving. So we've gone an hour, almost an hour and a half. Should we take a little break, or is everybody good to go to continue?
Michael, I think they're okay. They don't need a break.
Okay.
Because the sooner we finish will be better for those attending in the center.
Okay.
So shorter breaks will be better.
Okay. I'm always aware that the brain can only handle as much as the seat can endure. So let's go to these patterns. The first is the self-esteeming pattern. The self-esteeming pattern is a pattern that is designed to separate the self into acute aspects. And I think I've got that on the screen here. One chart. So there's yourself as a person, your being, and then your doing. That's the performance, and that's what you're experiencing. And by separating a person into these two aspects of self, myself as a human being, myself as the experiences I go through in the world, then what we're going to do with this pattern is to bring acceptance and appreciation to my experiences and bring a sense of awe or esteem to myself as a human being. So that's what you do in APG. I'm guessing everybody's been through that. And so there's 3 states that we access, and these are on a continuum from accepting to appreciating to esteeming. So each one of those is a state of welcoming. Acceptance is just barely welcoming. Okay, I accept. I acknowledge. And so you're welcoming, but not with much intensity or energy or enthusiasm. You're just accepting life as it is. And that's why we usually pick small little things to feel to state, like, okay, it's raining, or it's really hot outside, or the traffic is what the traffic is. So we just accept. And so acceptance is such a gentle and tender state that most of the time when you experience it, you're shrugging your shoulders. There's nothing else I can do except, okay, accept it. And yet, acceptance is the beginning of accepting reality, acknowledging reality, and it frees us from the fight. And that's the power of acceptance. It frees us from the fight. Because on this continuum, before you get to acceptance, over there is going to be rejection. So you reject, you hate, you fight, you scream, you holler, you don't accept. And then you move over to where accept. Once you accept, the fight's over. The war's over. And so accepting whatever losses has occurred doesn't mean that we're condoning it or approving of it or wanting it at all. That's the misunderstanding of acceptance. Acceptance is just acknowledging. And so there's things to acknowledge about ourselves. Every one of us have weaknesses. Let me just accept it. Every one of us have things that have happened in our life in the past that we don't like. So I just accept it. Okay, I went through that. I just accept it. Maybe even accepting your parents, especially if you were mistreated, or accepting some other interpersonal thing that happened. So once you can accept it, then the grief starts to end. In the psychology of grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross gave 5 stages of grief. The first was denial, and then bargaining with the heavens to make it go away, and then anger, and then depression, and then acceptance. And if you think about denial, well, I won't face reality. If you're talking about bargaining, you're trying to get reality to do what you want it to do, which is pretty actually egotistical. When it comes to anger, then that becomes something that we all go through when we face injustice and cruelty, brutality. We're angry, and maybe rightly so. And then finally depression, which is giving up, and then acceptance. So acceptance is the end of the grief process, and I think we should make it the beginning of the grief process. Acceptance. And so accepting your experiences, accepting yourself, accepting your weaknesses. But if that's all we did, And we'd be pretty miserable people, just that. And life would have just no love or energy to it. So we move to appreciation. What can you appreciate about you, about your life? So now with appreciation, we are encouraging a state of valuing. Here's my skills, here's my talents, here's my knowledge, here's my experience that I can appreciate. Here's the people I can appreciate. Here's the activities I love to do and appreciate. And so appreciation makes life full. And so helping a person to have a full life, appreciating themselves, appreciating their powers. You got powers of thought, of emotion, speech, and behavior. So let's bring appreciation. And when you have appreciation, then you got energy at the self-confidence level, the self-image level. So we bring acceptance and appreciation for you as a human doing, you as a human experiencing, and then for you as a human being, we bring esteem. And this is where we declare that as a human being, my value is a given. I was born as somebody. I count. I'm important. I have value and dignity, and I'm going to count that. If nobody else does, if everything in my life is not counting it, I'm going to count it. And so it becomes a declaration. For people with a spiritual faith, this is easy because you can say, I'm made in God's image and likeness. God made me a human being. And that declaration becomes much easier. For someone who doesn't believe in God, it becomes harder declaration to make. So this is the self-esteeming pattern. And the problem that most people have is they confuse these so that my value is based on my experience. My value is based on what I do or have or achieve or my recognition or my popularity. And therefore, the self-esteem is very conditional. It comes and goes, it rises and falls. And a person doesn't have a strong center out of which to live. And so that's what we want to do with people with this pattern. And the pattern in the manual, you don't have to do step one, just immediately go to step two, which is accessing these three states, getting them into the state so that you can now metastate the two aspects of self with these states. And so this is going to break the personalizing. And this would be the thing I would encourage you to do. If you've only got one session with someone, then I would do this. I would get this done, because if they can separate that, then they can hold off the things on the outside that are traumatic and not let it get inside. And if it doesn't get inside, then they're going to be okay to cope with it and deal with it. So does that make sense? Everybody good with that one? I've got one
Yeah,
question.
you just like I just want to make sure I'm not confused. You separate the person from the behavior, or you separate the person from what happened, from the trauma.
Right.
So which one is it?
or both.
Both.
So this is what we do, and this is what we experience.
Okay.
Here's a good question. Can you maintain your sense of value and dignity when life is falling apart? When you're in some kind of a stress, when you're criticized, when you lose a loved one? Can you maintain your value and dignity when that happens? If you can, then you've got a solid sense of self to cope with whatever happens. If you don't, then your self collapses, um, fragments, shatters with that activity. And that's what happens to so many people, that when a bad thing happens, it shatters their self. It crushes, it collapses their sense of self. They don't know who they are. They have identity crisis. So we want to separate that so they can have a solid sense of self. And if they can do that, that's the core of ego strength, the strength to face life as it is. So I see a question about self-esteem going up and down, and can I elaborate? Well, if this is conditional self-esteem, it'll go up and down based on the conditions. If it's not based on conditions, then it'll be solid. It'll be stable. It'll be a solid sense of self. And that's what we want for people. That's what we want for each of us. So yes, conditional self-esteem is when this is based on that. So this here is doing, it's also experiencing whatever you experience. And if your being is based on this, it's conditional. And it'll be up and down depending on the conditions. And if it's not, then what happens is that this aspect of you becomes your core, becomes your solid sense of self. And now, regardless of what happens, you can stay true to yourself. So this will be the foundation of ego strength, integrity, knowing yourself, having that strong sense of self.
Would it take as much time as probably it won't take as much time as it would normally take in a normal situation session, right? Because I think there'll be a lot of listening in the beginning and establishing rapport until you reach a point where they would actually accept doing any work, right?
Yeah, right. Right. That's why the interview may take a session or two, depending on how much pain they're in, how much suffering there is.
So how would you advise us to do this? Because still we have work, we have families that we need to return back to. So would the weekly thing, like if we go every weekend and start working with the same people on and on, would be enough? Or would it be like we go 3 days a week and you keep on working with the same people 3 days in a row? Which would be a better option?
I don't really know. Um, I think I would prefer to work with a person like 3 days in a row because I think the impact would be stronger. But I don't know for sure which would have the most impact. Um, Sometimes some people obviously need let me live with what you've said to me and done with me. Let me live with it for a while, let it settle down, and then next week when you do it again, it's like it goes in a little bit deeper. They live with that for a while, and then the next week it goes in a little bit deeper because you're repeating it and helping them. It's not just one exposure, but it's exposure over time.
So would you think it would be a better option to, let's say we start off with a certain number of people and we go and for 3 consecutive days we start off with them, and then from there we can start moving on weekly basis. Would that
Yeah.
be a good scenario?
Yeah, I think so. I really think so. Yeah.
Okay. طارق العربي، انت عايز تقول حاجة؟ طب ما تشيل المايك طيب. Somebody wants to say something, but انت you're muted يا طارق.
So if you'll unmute yourself, Tarek.
For some reason he can't unmute.
Okay.
طب طارق, would you like to write it? طارق عايز يقول حاجة بس مش عارف يunmute.
طيب يا طارق، بص انا هعمل لك اميوت، بس الاميوت بعد كده هيبقى بفلوس. لا استنى، يلا جو اهيد، اعمل اميوت بس جو اهيد and unmute yourself.
Hi, Michael. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the
Hi.
session. Just a quick follow-up question on what Yasmin just mentioned. Since there's so many of them, I'm just having a couple of thoughts here. One, would group work in this case, or it's actually too complicated and it's actually personal? That's the first part of the question. The second part, it's about really covering also more people. And would you rather that you do the first session, the approach just having people release with as many people as possible, and then have so you cover as much ground, and then go deeper over time? You let them release, let them deal with it. Empty as much as possible out of many people as possible, and then later on and go deeper work that will take maybe a couple of days or 3 days with someone until he reaches a point where he's completely out of the trauma. What would be your recommendation in this respect?
So what we know in therapy is that group therapy is a very effective way of dealing with groups of people. So group therapy has been around for 50, 60 years. So let's say you put 50 people in a room and start with a description of why are we here and what are we trying to accomplish. And it would be kind of like the interview that's on this page. You would just talk about how suffering can get inside and how it can make a person's life so miserable, and it can be dealt with. So you do a little teaching along that line, and then you might say, you might explain about how the emotions are working and how the thoughts are working. Then you might say, who would like to work with me to um, to change some of the thinking, maybe the movie Rewind. So you bring someone up because everybody corresponds and relates to that person. What you do there, a lot of people will have the experience. When you do it with them, they'll have the same experience. So you work with one person, but because it's relevant to everybody, it's going to have a good effect on lots of people. Some people, that's all they'll need. They just need to see someone experiencing it, and they're so quick to apply to self. And other people, they'll need those private sessions later. But group therapy, group counseling in that way um, can really set the pace. Um, and so we've used group therapy for dealing with alcoholics or sexual predators, people suffering depression, people suffering anxiety. So there's been so much of that in the past 50 years. I would really recommend if you can do that with groups of people there, that would be probably a really good thing.
But what if it triggers a group panic attack? I mean,
Well,
what if like you're in a group of people, like 10, and then like 3, 4 of them start getting panic attacks? Is that a
I would do this.
possibility?
I would do the same thing I do to an individual. Some of you, I would just then say, take a deep breath. Okay, let it out. Take another deep breath, hold it, let it out. I would do that with a group as I would do with an individual. Things like that, you can, from a trainer's point of view, you can do some pre-framing that'll prevent a lot of that. So if you have a trainer leading out and presenting that to a whole group, you can do a lot of pre-framing. If this starts to re-trigger something, be sure to do some deep breathing, because if you do shallow breathing, it will move into panic. So just do some pre-framing like that. Let's all practice deep breathing before we ever start. So you practice with the whole group, deep breathing. Breathe in to the count of 4. Hold to the count of 4, and then to the count of 4, release it. So you practice that before you ever start anything. So they have that resource available if that happens.
So would you recommend if we do the whole group coaching or therapy part, we could talk to them about something like you just suggested, and then we break them down into groups, and we're several people together, and somehow, yeah, would that work?
Yeah, I think that would be a good approach.
Okay. So what
One of
kind
the
of challenges do you think we would face?
So one of the things that you may face is that one person in the group loses it and has a panic attack or whatever. If that's the case, then you would want to have somebody that's part of the group that's going there, have somebody ready at any given moment to grab that person, take them aside, and work with them individually. So this is where you wouldn't want to be doing that just by yourself. You'd want to have 1 or 2 people kind of on your staff that's part of the team that could take them aside. One of the things that a group offers that is easier to do than with an individual is what we call universalizing. And this is what happens in group therapy around everywhere, is you come into a group and there's that universalizing. We all experience this. And it breaks up the person thinking, I'm unique, I'm special, I'm the only one suffering this way. because then they say that, oh, there's other people, and it universalizes it. And oftentimes that universalizing helps to break um, the privacy of that suffering and thinking that it's unique to one individual. Well, let's move on to the next pattern that's in the handout, and that's resourcefully good state. And this is to help a person now to realize that there's more than one state I have. The state of pain, the state of suffering, that's one state, but I have more than just that one state. I can access some other states. And so this will break up the pervasiveness of it. And so asking a person, tell me about some of the other states that you normally go into, emotional states or mental states that you find resourceful. And so now you're just going to do a basic state accessing process, getting a person into another state. And the whole purpose is to now have choice about different states. So once you do that, then helping them to anchor that state in some way, whether with something kinesthetic or visual or auditory, so that they can step out of that state. The simplest one would be the witnessing state, the observing state. And this is something that you can especially do physically if you're with a person. They're in a state. Ask them, what state are you in? Well, I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling afraid. I'm feeling angry. Okay, tell me about your anger. How are you breathing? How are you using your voice, your volume, your muscle tone? So you just go through helping them to become aware of their state awareness. And then with that state awareness, notice the state, because I'm going to ask you to step out of it and then back into it. And then ask them stand up and step away from it, look out the window, do something, and then ask them, I want you to just observe the state you were in. And so what you're doing, you're creating a witnessing state, an observing state. And you might ask them to shake it, shake your body, move around a little bit, get out of that physiology of that state, and now step back into it. Now step out. Now step in. Now step out. And what you're doing is helping them to monitor their state, register their state, anchor their state, learn state shifting, etc. And when they can do that, then they are beginning to really take control of their experiences instead of letting their experience control them. This is the essence of what we call emotional intelligence, state awareness or emotional awareness, monitoring it, watching how it comes and goes depending on different facets of whatever's happening in the environment, and then regulating it. Let's turn it up, let's turn it down, and then as they're regulating it, they're registering it. Well, this is what this is, and now they can begin to regulate it or control it. So this is going to break up that pervasiveness. So the suffering is not everywhere. It's in one place, and being able to visit that state, do the grief work is one thing, and then stepping out of it is the other. So this is a pretty simple piece, and yet it has some profound implications for a person when they can begin to do this. So, make sense?
Michael, can you hear me now? Okay.
Uh-huh.
Is it? Do you think? Do you advise if we can do most of the exercises mentally, because these people do not move. Most of them, as I told you, are like limbs cut. I cannot tell them step in and step out. Most of them are bedridden and tied in
Oh,
the bed. This is my
okay.
personal experience. For 5 years, I worked with them, so they can't
Okay.
really move.
Yeah, if
Uh,
someone is bedridden, then yeah, you're going to have to do it just mentally.
mm. It will be
Yeah.
helpful yet.
Yeah. Now, I'm guessing most of the people coming out of the war zone there in Gaza, I'm guessing that's not going to be the case with them.
Sorry.
I'm guessing that the people coming out of the war zone, they're not going to be bedridden.
No, from my experience, I used to work with them in the hospitals. They were injured and they came here to Egypt to the hospitals to get medication for their
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah.
So this was the case, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Releasing the past is the next one. And of course, now we're going to be sorting out the semantic space. And most people in pain have moved wherever their past normally would be, they have moved it to the present. And that's why they're living in the past. And when we have just asked lots of questions of people who are living in the past and living in that pain and suffering, we find that their semantic space has really shifted from what it normally would have been, what it was, and now their problem is the semantic space. When I used to do therapy, this was one of the most surprising things I found after I learned NLP. And I would start asking people, where's your past? And they would have it right in front of me. They would have it just right here. And um, and they're processing it. It's like they've taken it from the past and they brought it in, and now it's here, and now they're in it. And it's one of the reasons that they're kind of in that box and they can't get out of it because the past is here now, present. So we want to get them out of there. So so several things are going on. They're playing their movies. The thoughts are intruding. The beliefs are intruding that holds it in place, and their space has occurred here. So um, asking them about their timeline begins to help them to start sorting out before this experience, where was your past? Where's the future? And it'll be pretty common for most people that their past will be behind them or to their left side somewhere, and their future will be more to their right side um, or in front of them in some way. And so this is what we call controlling or managing the semantic space, redesigning the semantic space for someone. So I had a fellow by the name of Ray, and he had his past here, and I said, "Where's your future?" And his future was here, and his past was here, so he couldn't see the future because the past was blocking it. And so I asked him to rise above himself, look down on this, and then to take the past and to move it to his left, and we put it over to his left. And then I said, I want you to now drop down into yourself. And here's the new structure. The past is no longer here, it's here. And as you drop down in here, what's that like? Um, I remember him because he immediately grabbed his seat to hold himself still because he said, I'm dizzy, I'm disoriented because he couldn't see the past anymore. And so I said, let's do this for a few days. It turned out to be a week that he lived in that way. But because he moved the past over to the side and the future was in front, he began to be able to see his future. So a simple move like that, a simple reorganizing his semantic space, enabled him to stop living in the past. Now, the reason he was living in the past, he had been rejected by his parents and living in foster homes. He moved from one foster home to another. I think he had 9 foster homes. He was not treated well. He was just moved here and there, jacked around, and so his belief was, I've got to watch out, and that's why he put the past right in front of his face and the future beyond. He said, I've got to watch out for things that could go wrong. And so he was always on the alert to anything going wrong, which made him a pessimist, seeing things go wrong, believing that things would go wrong, and believing that unless he stayed super vigilant, things would get worse and worse. So once we changed the semantic space, then I had to address the beliefs that he had and the layers of meanings that he built up. And part of the meaning was about himself, his identity, because he believed that he was the kind of person who lives in the past. So we had to get beyond that and change some of those meta level frames that was holding him into the past. So this is going to break the permanent frame, and it's going to open up the future so that a person can now recover hope and recover anticipation of good things yet to come, and to rebuild their life so that they develop the coping skills to make that happen. Because as long as they live in the past, there's no future. And if there's no future, then moving forward with energy, with skills, with competencies, is just, they're going to play it way too safe and not learn the coping skills. So that's the releasing of the past pattern. And it's going to involve 2 things: the semantic space itself, and then all of the meta levels that hold it in place in the meta place. So let me give you a chance to ask about that. Getting a person out of the past. So Mohamed, I got a question here. I'll need you to translate for me. So while we're waiting for that,
So the question is, the biggest challenge is to help them move from the past to the present. That was the question.
right. Yeah, we want them to have a present. More than likely, anybody who's living in the past has brought the past, put it into the present, which is why they're living in the past. And they're giving way too much meaning, too much importance to what has happened. And it's energizing the past to still live in them. There's a question, how are we going to look into the future while they're still in the war and the current situation? So I'm guessing you're dealing with people who's not in the war. They have left the war zone. If they're in the war, it's time to cope and to deal with that and to get out of it. And so that's not going to be a psychological solution. That's going to be a physical solution. it's not about the future. It's about how to survive right now and how to deal with that and cope with that. Um, what we're dealing with here is when they're out of the war zone and when they're trying to put their life back together again.
What about survivor's guilt? If you have the whole family died and you have only one survivor, or that it doesn't have to be that. You know, there are different situations that could actually trigger survivor's guilt. So how do we
Yeah,
deal
so-
with that?
Well, so you want to ask the question, what have you done wrong? I mean, that's what we've got to ask. What have you done wrong? You survived. How was that wrong? Yes, the others did not survive. Are you feeling somehow you took their place? Is that so? It's a very subtle kind of a thing, survivor guilt. We see it on people when a plane crashes and 5 people survive and 100 people died. Then their reasoning is um, that they're asking a question: why did I survive and the others did not? And then they're calling in question, maybe I should have died. And it's a lot of false thinking that's going on. So you'll want to ask the question, what have you done wrong to survive? And the answer needs to be, I've not done anything wrong to survive. I was fortunate to survive. Maybe somebody jumped in front of a bullet and took a bullet for me, and that's why I survived. So now I can be thankful that I survived and thankful to that person for that. But clearing out the fact that you can only be guilty if you've done something wrong. And if you haven't done anything wrong, you're not guilty. Now, you may feel bad on their behalf, which is probably the subtle distinction that's going on here. I feel bad on their behalf because they didn't survive. So actually, it's a sense of loss. I feel bad for their loss, but it's not directly my loss. Now, if it is a family member, I've lost my family member, so that's a loss. I've grieved that. So when we get to the grief pattern, that's maybe one of the things that will grieve off the loss of a loved one. But the main way to clean this out is, what have you done wrong? And helping a person to count that surviving is important. It's a value. It's a human value to survive. There's nothing wrong with having survived, and we can feel sad. We can feel grief for the ones who have lost and did not survive. So another question, adding to the same point, is that the present they are living in is the same as the past. So I mean, they are seeing the past is the current. Yes, that's what's happening there. What is the best way? What is the best point that I, as a therapist or counselor, can use to support them with a thought that is very frequently and repetitive? What future do I have in these unjust and unfair and unjust situations? So now we go back to acceptance. And as difficult as that is, life is not fair. Life is not just. And if you're demanding justice or fairness, you're demanding something that cannot be. We can work toward fairness and justice, and we should, but to demand it and to say that the statement here, what future do I have in these unfair and unjust situations, the question is the question itself is a bad question. It's one of those questions, don't answer it. You know, sometimes we say in meta coaching, there are questions that you don't want to answer because the answer will lead you nowhere good. And here's a good example of that. Because they have combined two things, injustice, which is part of life and part of the world, and then asking a question, what future is there when there's that? Well, Nelson Mandela did not ask that question in jail. In his book, The Long Road Home, um, he never asked that question. His question was always, how can I make a better future for myself and my generation? What can I say and do that can make a difference? And he actually wrote that book while in jail during those 27 years, not because they allowed him, because they didn't allow him. And that was unfair. Um, he wrote it on scraps of paper that he snuck out with visitors who came to see him from time to time. And the guards and the prison people didn't even know it. And then, lo and behold, a few years later, the book was published by Nelson Mandela while he was still in jail. So injustice is there, unfairness is all around us. And if you can't change it, if I can't change it, this is an area for accepting. Acceptance enables us to begin to cope. If we use injustice to say, I can't cope, I can't do anything, that's the victim mentality. So this is what we've got to help people change that mentality because it's not going to be helpful. In what way can I take them from this state based on that question to a better state? Well, so now we're asking the question and eliciting hope. Hope is a function of competence and skill and knowledge about what can we do to make a difference. And the illustration with Nelson Mandela, we can always do something. If you had gone to the prison and saw Nelson Mandela and told him there's nothing you can do, you're in jail, and he said, well, what if I can write a book? And you go, well, they won't allow you to have paper, they won't allow you to have pencil, and they wouldn't let that paperwork to get out of the prison. You could maybe convince him it's impossible. But of course, he took the different attitude of asking, how is it possible? And that's the mentality we need to get people to think. How can I make a difference? How can I improve the quality of my life and the life of others? And when you start asking that question, your brain will start to come up with some answers of things that we can do to make things better. And of course, that's the state we want to get people into. So, Mohammed, we've gone 2 hours and 15 minutes. Should we take a little break? How's everybody doing?
I think, yes, we can take a quick break. So you suggest how long?
10, 15 minutes?
عايزين ايه?
Does that sound
Okay,
okay?
I think they are voting for 15 minutes. So
Okay.
So I
Okay.
think we can be back. Yep, half past. Well, it's 8. It's 8 right here. So
Okay.
okay.
Okay. So we'll see everybody in 15 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Michael, we're ready whenever you are.
Hello. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, now we can hear you. It's always good to unmute you if we want to hear you.
Yes, I kept trying to do it, but it said that the host had to do it. Okay. We're ready for the grief pattern, and I've put a little diagram here to kind of talk about the grief process. As I move away from my laptop, if you can't hear me, let me know. So grief is about loss, and loss implies that we've gained something. And in psychology, we call that ego investment or self investment. I invest myself in a thing, in a person. And as I invest, I put myself into my child, my work, whatever, my country. And that becomes an investment. And loss is the loss of that investment. That this has what I invested in a friend, and my friend died. And so now my ego, um, my ego space is less, because this is no longer inside my ego investment, my self-investment. And now it feels like a loss. And if I hold it there, if I hold this loss here, then I'm going to be in grief. Grief is the expression of loss, and it's designed so that we grieve off what we have lost so that we can then make a choice about recovering whatever it is that we've lost. So we become more and fuller and richer as our ego boundaries go out and include more and more. And then when there's loss, it's that sense of grief. We experience it as sadness. And when sadness goes wrong, and then it becomes depression. And so that's what grief is. It's an actual loss. So the first question with regard to grief is, what have you lost? Which is why helping a person identify the things that they have lost. If the loss is actual, then it's appropriate for grieving, that is for sadness, for tears, that cleanses us and that tenderizes our heart about that loss, which was precious to us. So, what is precious? What is valuable? What is important? What is significant? We we need to grieve it, and the grieving acknowledges the preciousness of it. So that's why the sadness and the grief is so healthy if we do it. If what we've lost is not a true loss, and sometimes that happens, we think we've lost something when we never had it. So an imaginary loss would be like, if only I had continued in the future, this would have happened. And now our direction in life has gone aside, so that is no longer even a possibility. You can't grieve that off because we never had it. It was never part of what we invested in, part of our ego investment. And so it's an imaginary loss. what would have happened if, and we can only get clean of that, get clear of that, if we readjust our thinking. Well, I never had it. It was a hope, it was a desire, it was an anticipation, but it wasn't real. So we grieve off what is lost. And the purpose of grieving it is, first of all, to identify it as precious, as valuable. And then secondly, to ask, how can I replace it? So my friend dies, and I want to replace it with going out and finding another friend. If we don't do that, then the ego boundaries shrink and become smaller and smaller. So that instead of my world being rich and full, it gets smaller and smaller because I don't replace my job. If I lost my job, don't replace my friend, don't replace this activity that's important to me. I don't, and so it becomes smaller and smaller, and this reduces the sense of self and the sense of one's value in life. So the purpose is to replace it. So the grief pattern, and if anybody has Source Book of Magic 1 and 2, we've got the grief pattern in here. It's number 66, and it's a process of going through the grief process of recognizing what we have lost, what it meant to us, the meanings that we have, and then having a good cry, recognizing and evaluating the grief, letting the grief occur so that we release it, and then we recode the grief so that so that we keep what is precious to us. So when my father died, I went through this grief process by very quickly thinking that what I have lost is his physical touch. I can't embrace him. I can't have a physical talk with him. So I started identifying, this is what I've lost. This is what I can't have anymore. And accepting that that's the case. And then as I identified what was important to me about my father, I identified this is why and how I value him as precious to me, and so forth. And then my image had always been out in front of me because I could go visit him. When that was no longer possible, I took the image and put my father on my right shoulder and imagined his presence there and what that presence meant to me, so that I didn't feel the loss of what was precious. His wisdom, his contribution, his care, his love, and so everything that I think about when I think him, I put here so that I made a clear distinction between what I have actually lost, and what I haven't, what I'm keeping. So this brings us to the question, now that you've lost that, what is the meaning, the value, the preciousness, and where will you keep it? Because it meant something to you. So let's not lose the values of it. And we might also, what have you learned from it? So I did that when early in my life, when I lost a job, when I was fired. So I lost something, wouldn't have it now. It was gone. But what have I learned? And so to make the loss more palatable, I thought about, what have I learned? What am I taking away from that is important for me, that I can keep with me, which then reframes the loss as an experience I went through, but not an experience that was devoid of meaning or significance, but significance that I have learned from and keeping with me that I don't have to learn all over again. So this is the loss process and the grief process, and helping a person to grieve it off so that they're back in a position to where they're looking now to replace the loss. So there's going to be a lot of grief going on with the people that you're working with, helping them to embrace that grief. Those who are afraid, they've got a fear of grief or a fear or prohibition against sadness or tenderness or that weakness. I have to address that from that point of view, that this is natural, it's inevitable, and it's part of what makes us really human. It helps us to keep our humanity more alive because it keeps us more aware of the value and preciousness of life. So the biggest thing I can say to those of you working with anybody who's suffering, make a list of those losses and then be with them in their grief process. And as they grieve off, help them to, what are you going to keep? What are you going to keep? What have you learned? And then it should bring it to a loss, to a resolution. If it doesn't resolve, then there's probably some cognitive distortions going on. I'll never get over this. So if someone says that to themselves, I'll never get over this, it'll just keep it going and going. And then the grief work cannot be completed because they're preventing it from it. So watching out for those over exaggerated words, those universal identifiers in their language will help them now to complete the grieving. So questions about the grief pattern? The next one is the movie rewind. And I'm guessing everybody has experienced that or have learned that when you did Coaching Essentials or NLP Prac, the movie rewind. It's based upon a metaphor of going into a movie theater and watching a movie as if from back on the 10th row. If you're in the 10th row and you're watching a movie, then you're not in the movie. And really, that's the whole point. So take the movie that you're playing that is tormenting you and that you saw it, you experienced it, you went through it, and it's painful, it's stressful, it's unacceptable. And put that movie up on the screen and step back from it. So once you get out of the movie, now you're not associated into the movie. And this is the meta program of associated or unassociated, whether you're stepping into the movie and experiencing it from the inside out, or whether you're outside and can observe it. So skill here is the ability to step out and just observe it. For some people, just putting it up on a screen and stepping out is enough, because then they're not pulled into it and re-experiencing it. So when we talk with someone, once the conversation begins and they start talking about their suffering, are they inside of it or outside of it? That'll be critical distinction to make. And if the person is inside of it, they're going to be re-experiencing it. And for the most part, we don't want them to re-experience it. Once was enough. And if they got the post-traumatic stress disorder, then they keep playing it and re-experiencing it. And if that's happening, then they're re-traumatizing. And that's what we don't need. We need to learn from it. We need to use it more effectively, but we don't need to re-experience it. So putting the movie up and stepping out of it is going to be the first step. Now, the way the pattern works is to put the movie up and turn it to black and white. Black and white sends the message it's not currently real. If it's in color and three-dimensional, it sends the message it's real, and we tend to step back into it. So by making it black and white and two-dimensional, just a picture on a screen, it helps us to get distance. And what we're talking about is psychological distance from it. And so if you can do that, then you can think about it rather than from inside it and of it. So by stepping it back, black and white, two-dimensional, then we can say, let's go 15 minutes before it started. And when you do that, when you ask, I want you to rewind the movie a little bit to where it was 15 minutes before it. Well, that presupposes 15 minutes before it is that it wasn't occurring. The bad thing, whatever the trauma was, is not occurring. So what is occurring? So everyday life, normal life, something much more pleasant and endurable. So now they have a picture of before the trauma, they got the trauma. So before we play it through, we want to get them to unassociate even more. Because if you're in the movie theater and it's playing, you can be tempted to step back in. And some people are so highly associated that all they have to do is see something and they step back in. And so we want to keep them out. The way to do that is to imagine that there's a projection booth, and in that projection booth, you can see the back of your head watching the movie. And so now you're going back to the projection booth, and now your perspective has really broadened. So you're not just seeing the movie, you're seeing the back of your head of your observing self watching the movie. And now you're in the projection booth. In the projection booth, we usually say something like, you can put your hands on the plexiglass because you're not even in the theater. You're outside the theater. And you can observe yourself observing. Because it's a control booth, a projection booth, you're in control of the movie. You can make it go faster, make it go slower. You can reverse it. So now from the projection booth, there's that sense of control. It's my movie, and I can manage it in multiple ways. So from the projection booth, I watch the back of my head, watching it to the end. Everything ends. At some point, it's over. And so by moving it forward, and if from the projection booth, if someone gets stuck somewhere, something really bad happens, and it's just like it's stuck there, you can fast forward. Let's just fast forward it to the end. The end of it is the trauma is over. So it implies that. So we want to go a little bit further. Sometime after that happened, you were okay. You went to bed at night and slept. You had a meal with some friends. So move it to sometime later when there was a scene of comfort or joy. Well, comfort and joy are two very different states compared to trauma. So we want to go to calmness, comfort, or joy. At that point, this pattern, you step into it. So you step into the comfort, you step into the joy. If a person has difficulty there, just ask them to, how's your body feeling when you're comfortable? Muscle tension, face, voice. If it's joyful, then what's the muscle tension of joyful? So you get them into the state. And once they're in the state, you prepare them with a pre-frame. In just a moment, while you're in this state of joy or comfort, we're going to rewind it, but not yet. But when I say so, and we're going to rewind it in fast rewind. So it's going to take 1 second. Zoom. It's going to go that fast. So you know how a movie goes backwards. You've seen movies go backwards. So you're going to do that and you're going to be inside it. So it's going, and we're going to go all the way back to the scene 15 minutes before the trauma occurred. So that's the setup. And then you ask the person, go into the state, you're going to be there fully. And this is going to be weird. That's part of the pre-framing. This is going to be weird. We're going to rewind this. And 15 minutes before. 15 minutes before means that you can't see the trauma. So then we'll clear the screen. And that's really important, to clear the screen. Just clear the screen, look around, get something else inside your visual perspective, something in the room, and then let's do it again. State of joy, rewind, back. And then you can set it up and say to the person, your brain is learning a whole new way of dealing with a memory. It can rewind it. And now I want you to do it 5 more times. Each time, start with a scene of comfort or joy, rewind to 15 minutes before, clear the screen, do it again. And so this repetition is helping the brain to do something that almost nobody does on their own. It's a learned process. And so this is what how the pattern works. Once you do that, then just letting a person sit there for a moment with it. And the final question in the final step of the pattern is, I want you, let's just test this. Let's see how well this has worked so far. I want you to try to imagine that movie again and try as hard as you can to get back that feeling of fear, dread, distress, sadness, whatever it was. So try as hard as you can to get it back. And most people can't. I've never had anybody who could. And if they get a little bit of it, then say, let's rewind it a couple more times. Do it 3 more times. So that's the movie rewind. And the whole design is to take the emotional charge out of it so that now I can think about the trauma. I can talk about it. I can observe it, and I can stay out of it. And by staying out of it, once again, it separates person, experience, creates that separation so that now I'm not going to be personalizing it. So that's the movie rewind pattern. Questions, comments about that?
Hello, Michael. If I had all the steps, and in the testing step, it had again the feeling, I repeat it again, the 7 steps again, or what would I do?
Now say that again. If the person has a feeling, what, at the very end?
If I tested if I did all the steps and I tested the feeling, and it has the same feeling or a little bit different, but not at all. I return,
Okay.
it's repeating it, or what would I do?
So just making sure that each step is done accurately and properly, so that it starts off with, I'm just observing it as a black and white, two-dimensional picture on a screen. I'm in the projection booth, playing it to the end, stepping into the state and rewinding from inside. If you've done all of those properly and the person still has some of the feeling, you might say, let's do it 3 more times. Do it 5 more times.
Okay, thank you.
Sometimes a person will not do it properly. You've led them through it properly, but then they're too global, they're too general, they may be mismatching you. So this is why knowing their meta programs is important. And so you might go through it with them again so that they learn how to do it really properly. When I used to work with the war veterans with the PTS, sometimes we go through it 5 times, and the emotional charge was really out of it. But they would say, "I still remember it." Yeah, you still remember it. Do you want to remember it? And I had 4 or 5 of them who said, I don't ever remember it. And I said, well, if you don't remember it and you're with some of your buddies and they start talking about some event and you can't remember it, would that be okay? And a couple of them said no, that they didn't want to lose complete memory of it. But 3 of them said that they'd like to just not have the memory at all. So I said, I want you to rewind it 20 times. And 20 times with all of them created amnesia. That's how powerful this pattern is. If you run it again and again and again and again, you can wipe that memory out of your consciousness. So I always warn people, be careful. Don't rewind it too much. Just take out the emotional charge so that you can now think about whatever that suffering was without getting into it.
Okay, thank you.
If you've not done this pattern, I would say 20 times, then I would encourage you to do that. To get this pattern, get it right, and know that you can do it and facilitate it so it has its effect. Practice with each other. Pick up something that just the thought of it still creates some unpleasant feelings, and you don't need those unpleasant feelings. Run this pattern 20 times with people, and you'll start to get really good at running the pattern and making it work. So if you've only done it a couple times, it's really not enough. Well, the next one is the acceptance pattern. And for those of you who have the Source Book of Magic Volume 2, it is on page 96, meditating acceptance. And it's pretty much the same thing that you did with the self-esteem pattern. First of all, you'll identify an experience of acceptance. So this acceptance should be something that is commonplace enough and part of reality and part of something you're not going to be able to change it, like the rain, like the traffic, like changing a baby's diaper. It's just something that exists, and You can either fight it or you can just accept it. And so you find that referent experience and help a person to go into that experience and to feel the acceptance and fully embody it. So in embodying it, what is the breadth of acceptance? What is the face of acceptance? Show me the eyes of acceptance. Let me see the posture of experience, the voice. And so you get a person to now use their neurology so that they go into that state, and it's a state of no longer fighting against something and just acknowledging it. Now we want to anchor it. You can anchor it with the word acceptance. You can just say the word acceptance. You can, in their presence, show them how you do it. Acceptance with maybe visually, auditorily, or you could set a kinesthetic anchor for this. Once you have that state, then you want to apply it to whatever you're inviting them to accept. And you could start it with accepting themselves or their power or their thinking or their emoting, whatever. And then to whatever it is that you're wanting them to accept. Once you have the acceptance state, then you'll probably want to set some frames, some belief frames, understanding frames that'll help to support that, and maybe even an identity frame. I am an accepting person. I accept reality. I accept truth for whatever it is. No need to fight it. I'm going to accept it. Acceptance enables me to move on. Acceptance allows me to find the coping skills and the coping powers to deal with life as it is. So those would be some of the frames to set with this acceptance pattern. The misunderstanding of acceptance, people misunderstand it and think that it means proving of something or condoning something, but it doesn't. It doesn't mean proving or condoning. It just means I'll deal with it. I'll acknowledge what it is. And it does not mean I'm going to resign, give up. It's rather I accept it so that I can take effective action in rebuilding life and coping with life as it is. So that's the acceptance pattern. And while it seems real simple, it is actually pretty profound because it makes a big transformational difference between someone fighting against reality. It may be the reality that of things past or things present. And then accepting. Acceptance is the foundation for serenity or peace of mind. Because if you're fighting it on the inside, you're not going to have peace of mind or serenity or calmness. Questions about that one? Page 96 of Source Book of Magic, Volume 2. Years ago, I wrote two Source Book of Magic books. The first one has 77 NLP patterns and a few metastate patterns. And the second one has 143 metastate patterns. And so while some of these patterns are in different manuals, some of them are not. And a place where you can get all of them would be the Source Book of Magic, 1 and 2. I think two is on the website under the shop. Number 1 is not because it's a Crown House book.
Regarding the acceptance part, I'm assuming that they could easily be resistance to that. Easily. Because how can I accept that I lost all my children, for example?
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, first the grief, let them grieve it, because they have lost someone who's lost all their children is big loss. And it's going to take some time to grieve that loss off and to reclaim each of those children and bring the children in. And what was precious, what was valuable. But by making that distinction, then the grieving process can end. And when the grieving process ends and a person is now ready to deal with life, then acceptance will come much easier. And acceptance, once again, you just have to keep saying this to them, does not mean you approve of this or condone this.
So how much effect do you think we could have in a short period of time? Would it actually do something, or it would just be like a waste of time? Any
It'd be a waste of time. Let me say this also. Your presence, I started with this at the very beginning. Your presence is the most healing factor of all. And if you go in valuing them, they'll be able to value themselves easier because you honor and respect and value them. And when you come in with acceptance, then you're a model of sanity and wellness for them. And your very presence will will be a sharp contrast to the presence of some people around them who keep amplifying pain and suffering. So what we know in psychotherapy, and I've got this in the book on metatherapy and what we do when we do the training, is that every single therapy, no matter how crazy the therapy can be, like the Freudian therapy, every therapy works. Now the question, and when we've done meta-analysis of therapies, we wonder, how can every single therapy work with some people at some time in some way? And what has been discovered for the last 30 years is that the key factor in therapy is not what you do, but who you are. If you're a loving, caring person, if you're ready to give your presence to that suffering person, if your heart is there and you're not trying to do any agenda or anything to these people, but you're caring, that very presence is the most healing factor of all. Now, there's several reasons for that. All of us are social beings, and your brain is a social mechanism, which is why we have mirror neurons. We are influenced by each other, and the social nature, the interpersonal nature of you entering into someone's life, and you can hold the space for them to have their emotions, to have their distress, to have their suffering, and you're there, and you're not running away from it, you're not punishing them, you're not judging them, you're just loving them in spite of the fact that you can do nothing. Because sometimes if they've lost all of their children, there's nothing we can do, but we can be present. And so it's never a waste of time if you have if you've got the right heart and you're ready to be there for them, you're going to be effective. And then with these tools that we have, once they're ready, then you can make a tremendous difference for them.
Yeah, I totally agree that would be the best scenario, just being there and listening with compassion and understanding. I think that would be a good start, at least.
Once you create that relationship with them, with your presence, then your ability to guide them is going to be the next really important piece to guide them. And the thing I've been trying to stress here, this chart here is really the description of trauma. It's personal, it's pervasive, it's permanent. So if you want to create traumaization, it's about me, it's everywhere, it's forever. And if you guide the person, it's not you, it's just that. It's not pervasive, it's just there in that context, in that event. And it's not permanent, it's just at that point in time then. As you guide the person through that with some of these patterns that we've been talking about, then whether they know it or not, it's a healing process. It's a healing mechanisms and factors that's going to make a difference. It may not be like that, may not be the snap of a finger, but over time, and especially if you get multiple chances to be with them, it will make a tremendous difference. Well, we have one more pattern that's in this handout, and that's forgiveness pattern.
Okay. Michael, I'm sorry, the mic was
Okay.
closed. So I have a question about what if, in general, there is rejection of our help? What if they don't accept to be better right now? How do we deal with that at the moment?
Well, if they will allow you just to be in their presence, I mean, that would be the next thing. Even with a healthy person, none of us can change anybody. I mean, that's the first principle of change. I can change no one. I can invite change. I can change my own self so that whatever the interactive pattern has been, it can't operate anymore. But until a person is ready to change and to receive help, then obviously they won't receive help. And so if they will stay in your presence, and even if you can't really address whatever they're addressing, if you can say things that they can overhear. So one of the skills of indirect influence and persuasion is called overhearing. Oftentimes we are so influenced when we overhear something that someone didn't say to us directly. And this is where some of the group processes may be a good way to get things started. Hold a group and a meeting and just say, here's the nature of suffering, here's the nature of trauma and traumatization. And they can hear it, they may reject it, but at least they're beginning to hear it. And when they're ready, they might then ask for, would you help me?
Okay, so is there anything else we can do to help them be ready to get help other than being just present?
The thing I mentioned earlier is kind of an obvious one, and it can come across as harsh, and yet if your heart is right, they'll accept it. So you talk to someone, they're in pain, they're in distress, and just ask them, do you like this? And even if they won't talk to you, you know that inside they're going, of course not. Do you want to keep this? And they'll go, of course. We're doing the away from. And so the away from with some people is going to be much more powerful than the toward. So the toward is, what would you like to achieve? What would you like to accomplish? And a lot of you, they're not there. So if you say, do you like where you are? Do you like all this stress? Do you like all this nightmares that you're having? Do you like this? And so the away from questions can sometimes enable a person to go, enough of this. There must be something better.
Okay, thank you.
Now, when it comes to suffering, and especially suffering imposed on people from the outside, as in the war, as in any time that some bad thing has happened and it's imposed upon us, and especially if it's from someone who's done something, then the last thing anybody wants to do is forgive. If you're in a state where you want to forgive, then you don't need to. I mean, that's the paradox of forgiveness. If you want to forgive, then you've already pretty well done it. There's some technical pieces you may need to do to do it well, but forgiveness is it is so misunderstood, and the main thing is that forgiveness is not for the other person. It's not for the other event or the actions that's going on. Forgiveness is for me. Forgiveness is helping me get it out of my system. And so forgiveness is really powerful because it allows me to stop this internal battle where I let an enemy live in my mind, and I'm always in a resentful, hateful, revengeful, anger state. Live in unforgiveness into that state for long, and a person becomes bitter and cynical and hateful, and it just ruins a person's humanity. A person's humanity just degrades when we live in unforgiveness. And when we say things like, I'll never forgive them, I'll never forgive her, never forgive him, we are just programming ourselves to living in really a dragon state that the person who's going to suffer the most from it will be ourselves. Because the other person, they may not even know that we are that angry and revengeful about them. So forgiveness is for us. And the pattern for forgiveness, once again, is in Source Book of Magic. And this one for forgiveness starts with separating person and behavior. So as we did before, person, behavior. And with that separation, now I'm going to access two different emotions. If I'm forgiving myself, compassion to person, and anger at behavior. So an interesting dynamic of forgiveness is forgiveness takes a lot of anger. So when I've led people with this pattern and guided them through the process, what are you angry about? What has violated you? What has violated your values, your everything you consider precious? What has violated it? Have you raged against it? Have you said, hell no? So we have anger at the behavior, at the experience, and compassion to the person. So forgiveness taps into this NLP presupposition behind every behavior is some positive intention. So self-forgiveness, I have done something I'm ashamed of, I'm embarrassed about, I feel guilty for, I did something shouldn't have done. I rage against the behavior. Yeah, that behavior is not acceptable. That behavior is wrong. And compassion to the person. So compassion, love, gentleness, kindness with me, even though I produced it. And this is what allows now the releasing of of the violation. I rage against it, declare that it's not okay. Now I can release it. And I don't hold that against myself. That's what we forgive. We forgive ourselves of that behavior. So I don't hold it against. If I hold this against me, then then this becomes a judgment against myself that I can't get away from. Well, the same thing with forgiving someone else, their person and their behavior. Rage against their behavior, compassion to they're a human being. They're probably doing the best they could with what they knew, positive intention, compassion to the person, rage against the behavior. And so that's going to be the distinctions of forgiveness, that once we take these two strong emotions, compassion and anger, then we've done our anger work, we've done our registering the violation. Now I can let it go and not hold it against that person. And by not holding it against that person, I free myself up. I don't have to keep remembering what they did and staying angry and revengeful and frustrated. I can clean it out. Now I'm clean, fresh, ready to go. And now life can begin again. And I can start to cope more effectively. So that's the forgiveness process. The final one is releasing those hurtful behaviors, and then future pacing it by, as I go into the future, I may not want to have a relationship with that person. So that's another misunderstanding of forgiveness. If you forgive, you have to get back with them. Forgiveness just means I'm dropping it. I'm burying the habit. And forgiveness is for yourself. It keeps your spirit clean, keeps your spirit sweet. It keeps you human and humane, and prevents that poisoning of bitterness. So obviously people are not ready for that when we start the healing, the trauma recovery. So I put that as the last one, that when we're fully recovered from a trauma, then we're not holding things against people or against ourselves. So questions, comments, as we wrap things up?
I really like how it starts off with asking them to separate their person with their behavior for themselves, and then by the seventh pattern, they're doing that to the other. It's a very nice way to look at things from two perspectives.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, those of you who will be working with the people coming out of Gaza, you have a real opportunity to bring your love and care and your skills to touch their lives. And as you touch their lives, you'll be touching the lives of many, many more people. So you're doing a very awesome thing, a wonderful thing. as you prepare yourself for bringing some of these healing processes to them. And as you do, any support I can offer you, um, I think I'll put together some of these patterns and send to Mohamed. He can send them out to everybody. Anything I can do to support what you're doing and how you're doing it, keep yourself in a good state, because you're going to be encountering, I'm guessing, a lot of suffering, a lot of hurt, a lot of trauma, and so keeping yourself so that you don't personalize it, keeping yourself so you're resourceful and able to bring hope and renewal and coping skills to these people. Um, a lot of good will be done.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So I have a question if you have time for that.
Sure.
And this is basically about what you just mentioned. What are some of your tips about taking care of ourselves during this process? So while we are helping others, what can we do to help ourselves?
Well, it's so important that you keep monitoring yourself so that if you feel your stress is going up because you're frustrated, you want to help so much, and some people are resisting or some people are not taking the help. If you find your stress going up, get a coach. You've got a whole community there that can help each other. Get a coach to reduce that stress. Step out. Keep stepping out into a good observing state, a good caring state, a curious state, so that you don't get sucked into it, because then you're not going to be that resourceful. The more you can practice these patterns on yourself, obviously, applying to self gives you more control and management over it. So that'd be important. I think maybe even setting up some kind of supervision process so that when you struggle with what can I do here with this person, you present it to some others and let them brainstorm with you. What else could you do that might be helpful? We use supervision to protect ourselves so that I don't get caught too much up into it, and I can always maintain some perspective.
Thank you. Very useful. Thank you so much. Dina, you had a question. If you want to unmute yourself, please go ahead.
The question I see written here, I would adjust it so that instead of dissociation, call it unassociated. Because when you step back, we don't want to get dissociated. That means I'm not feeling anything. We want to feel, but we want to feel compassion. We want to feel witnessing. We want to feel curious. We want to feel some energy and some control that we can guide them. So I would suggest instead of dissociation, change that to unassociated, that you're not associated in that suffering, but you're associated in other more resourceful emotions.
Any last questions before we end the session? So I guess, Michael, that's it. We don't have more questions. And I would really like to thank you so much for that. Very, very useful. Thank you so much for your generosity, for your time, and for your effort, and for supporting us with this. This is
Well,
a very important initiative for us here in Egypt to help in the region. So we really appreciate your time, and I'd like to let the people attending know that I did message you yesterday, and you're very, very quick to respond to that. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
well, it's my pleasure, and you and everybody else there, you're the ones doing the work. So take care of yourself. Believe in yourself. What you have is tremendously important for transforming people's lives. And so believe in yourself. And anything I can do to support you, just send me an email. I'll be there for you.
Thank you again so much. And I also like to thank the rest of the leadership team of NeuroSemantics, because we did get support from several others, and we're looking forward to have more sessions with them. And I'm really proud to be part of this community and this society. Thank you so much, Micheal, for bringing this and for helping us with this. Thank you.
All the best to everybody.
Thank you.